This is a review of only the launch content of Destiny 2 Beyond Light, as the remaining content has either not come out yet or not had enough time to review properly. The core of a Destiny expansion is the campaign. It is the first thing you play, and it sets the framing for the next year of Destiny. 2 years ago, Destiny 2 Forsaken provided a lengthy campaign full of substance and interesting mechanics. Its uniquely non-linear break in the middle allowed for story progression and customizable challenge while still allowing for a clear beginning, middle, and satisfying end to its narrative. Forsaken wasn't a champion of the FPS genre, but it did fascinating things and provided an enjoyable story with interesting characters. Last year, Destiny 2 Shadowkeep launched with a short, confusing, grindy, and underwhelming campaign. It started out strong, revealing the darkness in a physical, in-game form for the very first time, but whimpered slowly to an abrupt finale that left players more confused than satisfied. Shadowkeep had its moments, but its reused locations and bloated quests left the campaign feeling more like busy work than a space opera. Beyond Light falls somewhere in the middle. Do note, I'm avoiding footage of key campaign moments to avoid spoilers, because I do think the story is good enough to warrant not spoiling. Beyond Light's story is short. I completed the whole thing in about 4 hours, though I was over-leveled for small portions of it. Unlike Shadowkeep, which was short and bloated, Beyond Light is short but sweet. The campaign design isn't mind-blowing, but it's fairly well done. There's a surprising amount of missions that happen in the open world or start naturally as you stumble upon them. This seamless transition, instead of the black screen then teleport, feels really good and helps for immersion. I'm super interested in seeing more of this sort of stuff. The story itself is very compelling. If you're a fan of Destiny's lore but are continually disappointed that it doesn't show up in-game, Beyond Light will make you happy. From the history of the Fallen to the story behind the Exos, Bungie does an excellent job of bringing some of its best sci-fi into the game, both directly in the main narrative and through excellent environmental storytelling. Walking around Clovis Bray's Exo facility for the first time was deeply fascinating, as it's full of Exos both half-built on tables and fully constructed, laying dead on the ground. The whole construct has a very eerie feeling to it, and I applaud Bungie's environmental design here. When it comes to the core narrative, no motivation could be quite as influential as the death of Cayde 6 and Forsaken, but Variks and Aramis serve their roles well. Aramis particularly is one of the more fascinating villains in Destiny. She doesn't reach the dizzying heights of Uldren or Oryx, but she is a believable character who makes a solid case for her choices. In her ramblings, I often found myself agreeing with her over Variks, which made my battle against her all the more conflicting. We finally get clear explanation of the Whirlwind, the event that led to the downfall of the Fallen, and see the impacts in the game, not in a lore tab. Aramis's generals, on the other hand, are not nearly as fascinating. Their names are too similar, and they get almost no build-up. None of them have interesting personalities or mechanics like the Barons in Forsaken, nor do they have nostalgia like in Shadowkeep. The biggest thing these missions provide is the catharsis of using Stasis. Speaking of Stasis, I'm frankly impressed. Initially, I believed that locking Stasis behind the campaign made no sense, but I get it now. With Forsaken and the Taken King, the new subclasses were supplementary, extra quests that weren't directly related to the main story. In Beyond Light, the story revolves around you acquiring and utilizing Stasis. It's ingrained into the core narrative and gameplay threads. In fact, you don't actually unlock Stasis until the final mission. For that, you get to use Stasis multiple times in short bursts with boosted recharges. It does a fantastic job of making you feel powerful and in control every time you commune with the darkness, adding to the conflict. But how does Stasis itself feel? Stasis is simply excellent. Before you even begin to approach how it fits into the RPG systems, as a set of abilities, it is easily the best Destiny has ever produced, and I think there are 2 clear reasons why. First, it simply feels amazing to use. Destiny's gunplay is widely known for how fun it is and how in control you feel when you fire a bullet, but traditionally its abilities have been satisfying but not quite on the same level as its gunplay. With Stasis, the game feel of using your abilities truly is on par with that experience in every way, with just the right amount of feedback, perfect animations, and frankly, the best sound design in the whole game. A second key aspect of Stasis is that it's intellectual. Destiny's elements have sort of had identities, but the bulk of their abilities tend to only be loosely linked together. Stasis, as an element, distinctly revolves around three key effects: slow, freeze, and shatter, and successfully utilizing it requires you to be aware of what state each enemy is in and how your cooldowns are timed to be able to combine effects quickly. Compare the Void Grenade, which serves just to do damage, with the new Duskfield Grenade. The Duskfield Grenade does almost no damage at all, but it sucks in enemies, slows them down, and freezes them if they can't escape in time. It's nice to see abilities revolve around status effects that require you to be aware of the context used abilities in, rather than damage. It also helps that the loop of freezing and shattering enemies is incredibly satisfying. However, Stasis also has noticeable faults. There's been basically no attempt whatsoever on Bungie's part to balance it for PvP, and so Crucible has honestly become impossible to play. Bungie, who have gotten pretty good at not wrestling control away from you, implemented a system that allows the game to wrestle control away from you at any time. Stasis is super fun to use and build around, but simply awful to play against. It is just not fun, and frankly, you'd be better off avoiding PvP altogether for a while, if it weren't for the fact that competitive is the fastest way to power up. Bungie's already shown Stasis can be tuned separately in PvP, and until they make needed changes like reducing the power of the freeze effect, I think you should just stay away. However, I think it's important to recognize that while this kind of imbalance is not fun, Destiny's PvP is likely not going to be a balanced competitive experience ever again, if it really ever was. As someone who started playing Destiny for Crucible, who was primarily a PvP player for years, I've long accepted that Bungie cares for PvE over PvP, and so I'm willing to accept insane powers like Stasis making PvE more fun at the expense of the Crucible. This is the part I'm most hesitant to review, partly because I think Europa is going to turn out like the Dreaming City and evolve over time. What I'll say for now is that Europa is already maybe my favorite location in Destiny. Not only is it gorgeous and huge, but it's deep. There's massive sections of this destination both under and above the ice. Unlocking chests and areas through Stasis is a cool mechanic I would love to see expanded in the future, perhaps in a location that's almost more Metroidvania-like in design. The environmental design is just brilliant. A lot of the skybox is composed of locations you can physically go to, and smaller areas like the Clovis Bray facilities are perfectly designed for environmental storytelling. Walking through Eternity for the first time, seeing Exos both half-built and lying dead around you was a fascinating experience and really starts to tell that story. Europa is also dynamic. The new weather system doesn't do as much as I would like it to, but I also know that for many people, it does too much. The way it works is that Europa can periodically have snowstorms that pick up over time. At their peak, the visuals and sounds work perfectly to give you that feeling of being stuck, and almost make you want to find a building or a cave to hide in. It does affect gameplay somewhat, primarily in reducing visibility dramatically and wind affecting your Sparrow. I wish they applied the wind effect to regular player movement as well, and maybe threw chunks of ice around you could shoot down to avoid getting hit. Regardless, it's a really good start. Destiny 2, the modern game, is grafted onto the bones of a fundamentally different experience, Destiny 2 in 2017. And so one of the things that stands out most to me about Beyond Light is how it goes and tries to repair a lot of the little cracks in the foundation in order to modernize them. A lot of these changes come with the UI, a new Triumph screen that is better designed for a continuously ongoing game, an improved lore collection, and the fantastic dark menu backgrounds. Others come in gameplay, like updating Ghost to use basically the Armor 2.0 system, and making all Sparrows spawn instantaneously. And yet others are more major, like a revamped new player experience. There are some misses. The Milestones menu has been mostly useless for over a year now, and I still think the quest screen and bounties need an overhaul. But fundamentally, there is still a lot of little touches focused around fixing the foundations so that future expansions can evolve the game without having to reinvent it. And certainly, not all of this work is done. Destiny's new identity as a sort of free-to-play action MMO on every major platform with cross-save is still one that isn't solidified. Cross-play is coming in 2021, and Bungie just removed the vast majority of content that was ever available for free. As an aside, while I get the decision to lock Stasis behind Beyond Light, I don't get why Bungie couldn't make an exception for cross-save. When logging in on another platform without Beyond Light, your character is unable to use the Stasis subclass. With so many of the new quests revolving around using Stasis, this one move kneecaps cross-save and practically ruins the feature for players like me who regularly play on platforms like PC, PlayStation, and Stadia. I think locking out content like the campaign, raid, and possible dungeon is fine, but core gameplay just isn't. There's also the hugely controversial matters of content vaulting and sunsetting, both of which take previous, usually paid-for content and either make them useless or remove them from the game entirely. Content vaulting was implemented in a really cool way through lore, but it removed half of the game's content. I can sympathize with the sheer number of technical issues having so many activities and destinations would have caused, but I think in such a case, you have to have an alternative plan. It would have been much better received if, for instance, Bungie pushed out another small Rise of Iron style expansion this year, with the excuse that they would release a full Destiny 3 next year, perhaps even carrying over Forsaken and Shadowkeep. That would mean being able to go back and play Destiny 2 at any time. Or if Bungie provided some way of playing on older servers, so we could go back and not just play old content but experience older metas. I'm not going to pretend that any of this content was stuff I was likely ever going to play again, because it wasn't, but it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I also think it makes calling Destiny 2 a free-to-play game disingenuous because there's so little free content. While I don't like it, I'm ultimately tolerant of content vaulting. It does feel like it cleans up the game a little, and if you've started a new character in the last year, you might recognize being overwhelmed from just how much stuff there is to do and how little structure there is to introduce it all organically. The aspect that I dislike much more is weapon sunsetting. One of the concerning aspects of sunsetting is that all gear from Forsaken and Shadowkeep, expansions that are not just paid but you can still pay for, unlike Destiny 2's base game, has become useless, effectively kneecapping these expansions. The only real reason to buy either now is the raids and Forsaken's campaign, each of which have value but not enough in a game driven by loot. This could have been resolved better had there been a massive new influx of weapons and armor, vendor refreshes, and other things we've expected from major Destiny expansions. However, I still think the system itself is fundamentally flawed. For one, it's confusing. There's too many numbers to worry about, and the power systems and seasonal systems are already confusing enough without combining them into the max power stat that runs on a rolling basis rather than refreshing yearly with each expansion. The core issue is that it's an excessive solution to a problem, that of balance concerns, and there's simply being too much loot for Bungie to take into account. This isn't as much of an issue in traditional MMOs where weapons usually feel exactly the same to use. But in Destiny, guns are your gameplay. Not being able to use certain weapons changes your gameplay experience directly. I'm not opposed to sunsetting, but I think the scope is wrong. When they needed a scalpel, Bungie brought a Warhammer. I feel like sunsetting should be a way Bungie introduces the concept of removing weapons from this living game and should be applied specifically and deliberately to a set of weapons each season. For instance, Beyond Light could have focused on sunsetting the remaining static rolls weapons from Destiny 2's launch and previous pinnacles, and future seasons would be more interested on removing irrelevant gear. Include it in the patch notes or repertoire rather than blanket cutting out nearly all of the game's weapons. One thing content vaulting and sunsetting do make clear is Bungie's claims of a new era for Destiny. Beyond Light does not have enough content alone to sustain a full third entry in the series, but if it did, this would be your Destiny 3. And honestly, that's what a lot of the other changes do as well. If there's anything that stands out to me about Beyond Light, it's that it's a statement of direction. Beyond Light is a clean break from the remains of Destiny 2. This expansion is not just a content drop, it's a vision that sneaks its tendrils through every system, activity, and piece of gear in this game in order to root out anything that doesn't follow Destiny's new direction. Destiny is an action MMO now, and even if Beyond Light isn't perfectly there yet, it does set up a clear foundation for future content to lay on. If you're someone who has been turned off by Destiny's many failings, or found it difficult to enjoy in the last few years, or found a lot of Bungie's shakeups leave a bitter taste in your mouth, you probably shouldn't buy Beyond Light. If you found yourself gradually enjoying Season of Dawn, Worthy, and then Rivals more and more with each of the new, more intense RPG elements and MMO aspects, you will love Beyond Light. If you fell off a while ago and are curious about getting in, make a new character and experience the fresh new player experience for free as it reintroduces you to this game before making any purchase. The content is great, but besides Stasis and potentially the raid, it does not reach Destiny's highest highs. The systemic changes are ambitious, aggressive, and depending on how you see it, maybe even anti-consumer. But they are a clear and authoritative statement on where Bungie is taking this game. I think for a lot of players, this future is one where Destiny doubles down on what it does best and becomes truly transcendent. For many, however, the train is about to switch tracks, and this is where they get off.